Hi, my name's Mandy Kirk, and I'm a creative producer at Prologis. And I want to welcome you to Moving the World, our podcast about the people and ideas reshaping logistics and beyond. In this episode, Jeremiah Kane of Prologis sits down with Andrew Kimball from the New York City Economic Development Corporation about the rise of blue highways and how urban waterways will change the future of freight. So, let's get moving.
Welcome, Andrew. We are thrilled to have you on the Moving the World podcast.
Great to be here.
So, from the Navy Yard to Industry City to now EDC, it seems like the waterfront and the waterways have always been a important part of what you've been working on. Was that always by design, or how did you end up here?
Well, economic development and the Brooklyn waterfront have always been a passion. A breakthrough job for me was in 2005, getting appointed to run the Navy Yard, and I was there for almost 10 years, and that led to a private sector gig at Industry City. And now to be in the position where EDC controls about 120 miles of the 520 miles of shoreline in New York City, including 200 acres in South Brooklyn, and most recently, the acquisition of the 122-acre Brooklyn Marine Terminal in Red Hook, has just been an amazing platform to work with the community, to work with the private sector, and government to get people working on the waterfront again.
That's exciting. But before we get to the future, I think maybe we'll start with the past a little bit, right? New York really was born from its waterways, from the harbor initially, and then even more so when they opened the Erie Canal, that really vaulted New York over Philadelphia as to its national prominence. And then ultimately to its international stature we have today. So in a lot of ways, everything that's old is new again as we sort of rediscover our waterways as a way to transport goods and things like that. What are kind of the key problems you think the Blue Highways Initiative is trying to solve in New York today? And why is it really the right moment to bring this model?
Yeah, I mean, this really is back to the future. Commerce in New York City for hundreds of years relied on the use of the waterways. That really began to change post World War II, and then the move of containerization to the New Jersey side of the harbor, the development of our highway systems, just made it very easy for trucks to flow into New York City and serve people. That has sort of exploded in the last decade and a half with e-commerce, where 80% of New Yorkers are getting a package delivered to their home at least once a week. So, what that has meant is convenience for New Yorkers on the one hand, but it's also created a massive problem. It's a congestion problem. There's a negative economic impact of $20 billion a year due to truck traffic. There's an environmental problem with emissions in the air, and particularly that's concentrated in places like the South Bronx or along the BQE. For all of those reasons, it is time for us to recapture the waterfront for commerce and moving goods by water.
Yeah, I mean, I think New York might be one of the hardest places in the country and potentially the world for movement of goods. How do you think that marine network really gives us an advantage in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is going to be a generational shift. And, people have been talking about getting back to the blue highways, back to moving goods by water for 20 years. I'm really proud that in the last 2 years, we've made more fundamental investments to make that a reality than the 20 years combined before it. And that means really putting our money and our real estate where our mouth is. It means, redeveloping the Brooklyn Marine Terminal with a 60-acre all-electric port focused on containers moving food east of the Hudson. It's a real food security issue. It involves bulk materials, moving, construction materials, and it involves small package delivery, all three of those things. It means developing a port up at Hunts Point where you can bring those goods, whether it's a container of food by barge, or it's bring goods from Hunts Point back down into the city to places like the Skyport. We've got over 25 different sites around the harbor that we're moving on right now, some of them publicly controlled, some of them privately controlled. And it's really critical that we get this moving. New York just can't take the growth rate that we have today of trucks, 40,000 trucks a day moving back and forth, the vast majority of them over the GW and the Verrazzano. And that's just not sustainable for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm personally responsible for no more than 20,000 of those. We definitely have to work on the rest. You, from your vantage point, have had the privilege to sort of see some other countries, places like Spain and Sweden, non-S countries, Netherlands, things like that, who have done various things in this area. What lessons can we really learn from abroad?
Yeah. Look, we get a lot of things right in New York City and have the best of the best, but part of being really good is understanding what you don't have. And what we don't have is experience in niche ports. We've got big mega ports on the New Jersey side, and they're very successful and will continue to be successful and grow, but we don't have niche ports. We don't use our waterways the way they are using them in Europe. And, whether it's the port of Oslo or Paris, European countries for years have been moving goods via the water, and that's only growing. So, my personal experience just over the last couple of years has been through visiting some of these cities and then also attending conferences. The most significant one is AIVP, which last year was in the Port of Lisbon, a little bit like a mini San Francisco. Again, you've got, container business right next to housing and parks, cultural institutions, all the kinds of things we can have in BMT, the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. It's not the 1950s anymore. You can do these things side by side. But then hearing presentations about how goods are being moved using the rivers and the waterways throughout Europe. And, some of that we're looking to emulate. Some things will be unique to New York City as we develop these blue highways.
I think one of the things we see is, there's a similar trend and the similar animating driving force that has driven our interest in the blue highways is, look, the volume of goods continues to grow. It's one of the things I think that's interesting is it's broadening, right? So, it's moving beyond just packages and bulk goods, and now it's expanding to more and more grocery and food delivery and things like that. So that trend is only going to continue as people, e-commerce continues to grow, and I don't think that's not stopping anytime soon. And so for us, it's a yes and, right? It's how do we both supplement the traditional supply chain, take advantage of these sort of latent assets that the city has, but also, as there's all sorts of different goods, giving our customers more options. It won't just be maritime transport, but it'll also include, e-bicycle delivery, e-quads, electric vans and vehicles and things like that, as well as technology that we don't quite know exactly how it's going to get used by. There was a moment where drone delivery was the next big thing, and then it sort of went quiet. But, and this is a lesson that I think might be applicable outside New York a little bit, which is, if you don't have a waterway in your city, you may have a freight rail line that might be repurposed with certain technology, or, if drone delivery takes off, it might be, a general aviation airport that was, less and less used, but may come back into favor. So there'll be opportunities for I think, looking at the historic infrastructure in new ways in a lot of different places around the world. So it's a pretty exciting moment for it.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I was excited about coming on this podcast is that Prologis is an 800-pound gorilla in this space. Just an enormous footprint, very successful business, and the fact that Prologis is spending the kind of time it is studying the Blue Highway and how to play a role really speaks volumes to to a shift that's going on. Obviously, there are economic challenges to this that we're well aware of. The economics are there today to move construction materials, to move aggregate, to move lumber. You see more and more projects getting staged by the water side, like JFK Terminal is getting staged by the water side. And as we do massive resilience projects around the city, it's going to be staged from the water side. As you do the BQE rebuild and BMT, it's going to be staged from the water side. But the small package delivery, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, although the economics we're starting to feel are getting close. And to me, on the small package delivery, it's who has real estate on the New Jersey side and warehouses, and the interest in actually figuring out how to get those small packages on a fast boat and get them into Manhattan in particular, but throughout the city, but Manhattan in 15 minutes, as opposed to putting them on a truck and having them stuck, in traffic for more than an hour to get to their final final destination. And who has the aptitude to not just connect that boat trip to that last micro mile, which, as you said, is going to be on an e-cargo bike or quad. And you see an explosion of those kinds of companies that are delivering that last service. I would say the piece that's the most complicated from an economic point of view is moving containers. But we think there's a unique opportunity with the produce that comes in from South and Central America today into Brooklyn. The challenge is today, it gets on a barge, it goes back to New Jersey, it goes into cold storage, it gets on a truck, it goes to the Bronx, it gets processed, it gets on another truck, goes to its final destination. That is obviously nuts. And that's why we're focused on allowing that business to grow with reefers, bring food produce into Brooklyn, then transloading them onto barges and floating them up to Hunts Point, where they would get unloaded, get processed, and hopefully go out by water on e-cargo trikes back to parts of the city for that final last mile to a restaurant or a supermarket.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, as we are looking at it, and we almost started in a somewhat, one is almost everything we do is in trying to either anticipate what our customers' needs will be in the future or in response to what their needs are now. And we have, sort of the tremendous infrastructure on the New Jersey side of the river that you referenced, but it was how do we put the pieces together and do it in a way that drives adoption, right? Because if you don't have adoption, you don't have anything, and more specifically adoption at scale, because when you talk about the 40,000 trucks and things like that, to make a meaningful difference and to really help, you have to be able to do this at scale. And how do you do that? One is to reduce the risk of trial and also the risk of making the investments necessary around that. And for us, that means doing it in a way that is least disruptive to the way that things are currently done within the supply chain. So it doesn't require a reinvention of, material handling within a warehouse. It's, the same vehicles that went out before can go out now. They get on a barge or a ferry, somewhat agnostic there, and move across the river and then are unloaded. And so it allows the customers to make this transition with minimal, there's certainly going to be it's a new way of doing things, but at the same time, they can do it in a way that, if it doesn't quite work the way they think, that they haven't, squandered a large investment, and there's some resilience to that investment. I think it'll be a transition over time. We happen to believe pretty strongly that we want to build facilities that do goods movement on the destination side. That does two things. One is it allows that supply chain to sort of function most similar to the way it did before. And secondly, if there's a storm or something, there's a problem with a barge or things like that, that facility can get replenished in a traditional way, especially initially, that allows, day one, it may have some barge service and some truck service, and over time, it'll be allowed to transition to more maritime use. But it doesn't have to be all of that day one, so that that risk that someone is taking isn't so huge up front. And so the ability to drive that adoption by making it easy we think is really important. And to your point, I think we're very close on the economics, especially if we can manage that risk side as we sit today. And it's really why we're talking, is because I think we are quite close.
Yeah, it seems to me one of the great competitive advantages Prologis has is the number of warehouses you have on or near the waterfront, on the New Jersey side, where you may not be using the water today, and to be able to make that connection, particularly with goods that are packaged, say, in a small box, already in the warehouse, and can go, on a NYC ferry like type boat, a fast boat, and then get on the back of a e-cargo trike, on the Manhattan side. That seems like a tremendous, competitive advantage. But you're right, about the number of touches, and you don't want to have to package goods, on the New Jersey side, then repackage them on the Manhattan side, and then have the delivery. All of that means cost and time. I think a lot of this is going to be in the early years. One is, making sure we have the maritime infrastructure in place, because we don't have enough of it today. And that's why I've been so focused on building out the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, on the downtown Skyport, on the Hunts Point Marine Terminal, eventually on the west side, near Pier 92, probably as a rebuild, of the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal there, but to have a point in Midtown, where goods can come in directly by water, is absolutely critical. You know, we are testing the market in lots of different ways. As you know, we're doing pilots right now, pilot with Dutch X, a pilot with a number of other smaller operators. We have floated food down from Hunts Point, to Lower Manhattan. We had the RFEI in partnership with, DOT a couple of years ago that you and a lot of others responded to. We have an RFEI out right now for, port operators and maritime operators, for their best ideas on the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, as we move towards a formal RFP, probably in about a year and a half.
What are some of the, I mean, you mentioned the Hunts Point, downtown Skyport, and Brooklyn Marine Terminal. What have been the big takeaways or lessons learned as you've started with some of these initial projects? And we've certainly been either participating in or following along many of those, and are very excited for ultimately what happens on the west side. But what have you learned so far as you started taking this and putting it into practice?
Waterfront work is massively expensive. Massively, massively, massively. It seems to be going up, by the month. And that's why, frankly, our, partnership, with Skype with the private sector infrastructure company, Skyport's ADP on the Skyport is so important, that we've got a private sector partner in there with us, that will not only work to, you mentioned drones before, they're very focused and have committed to converting to EV tolls, electric helicopters, the minute the FAA approves them. And, we've done a couple test flights already in New York on that. That's going to dramatically change the quality of life for New Yorkers in terms of noisy helicopters overhead, and may also down the road facilitate the movement of goods by drones. But right next to that helicopter landing spot or eVTOL landing spot, is going to be a very significant, barging setup, for, last mile goods to be brought in from another borough or from the New Jersey side, to get very quickly, into Lower Manhattan, to destinations. We're going to be looking for massive private sector investment alongside us, at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Part of the genius really of that project is we're going to build 6,000 units of housing nearby. That housing is going to partially cross-subsidize the build-out of this port, because we know it's so expensive. At the, Manhattan Cruise Terminal, we're going to be looking to our, cruise partners, through competitive process to invest massively alongside the city. That will also include, a blue highway, distribution site, as a part of that redevelopment. So point is, biggest challenge is expense, therefore need to be doing these public-private partnerships to make all of this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that cross subsidy at the marine terminal. I actually think that's a really powerful tool. It all drives to that adoption and risk reduction. And one of the biggest risk reducers is can you drive down the cost to the point where it's enticing customers to use those facilities. And I think that's actually a really nice tool in the toolbox in the appropriate scenarios to bring to the table to help manage some of those costs. Because to your point, dealing with the water and piers and things like that is by its nature expensive, and to be able to just offset some of that actually is a pretty it's exciting, and we think with good thoughtful design, and we've seen it in other places around the world, and some of the work we've done here at Prologis, there are ways to, if it's to mix some of those uses. It doesn't have to be purely distribution. It could be intertwined with other uses if it's done thoughtfully, and that's pretty exciting. And it's good to see that EDC especially shares some of that vision at the marine terminal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would also share and would love your ideas as we pull this together. But we, in addition to that cross subsidy with development on site at these locations, we need to figure out other ways to incentivize participants in the Blue Highway along the chain to invest and move goods by water. And to me, that means figuring out the right set of tax incentives, frankly, to facilitate this. We use tax incentives, we collectively, government, to incentivize all kinds of behavior. Why wouldn't we want to incentivize moving more goods by water and decreasing traffic on our streets? It seems to me logical. How you do that, at what point in the chain, and who benefits from those tax incentives, we are now actually studying internally and with outside consultants. But we're going to need feedback from the private sector, from folks like Prologis, to help us understand how we can move this. I think another reason this is the right moment, and part of this has been because EDC for, again, 20 years has been talking about the Blue Highways, as has New York City DOT. But I think the BMT project in particular has drawn so much attention from our elected officials. And they are hungry at the state legislative level to have the best ideas brought to them on how they can incentivize the use of this new way of moving goods.
Yeah, and I think, tax incentives have proven very, very successful when, structured correctly. They do drive growth, and we certainly, when we're examining new development and new investment, there are many investments that are made or break by a well-structured tax incentive. So we're obviously happy to engage on that, and I think it will be critical to making it work.
And I think incentivizing rather than penalizing is the better approach. Although, another reason we should just say out loud that the moment is now for companies like Prologis to get into this space is congestion pricing. Because not only, is the traffic and the fuel an expense, but now the price of tolls has gone up significantly. So it is a perfect moment to reevaluate the economics of maybe spending a little bit more on the front end to get the Blue Highway going.
Yeah, and in our calculus and in our discussions, that it absolutely, that matters, right? We talk about congestion pricing. It does two things. One is it reduces congestion and makes some movements around the city faster and easier. At the same time, it also does indeed provide an incentive to find a way to do certain movements within that boundary, and to move goods on the waterways and other ways there without having to go back and forth across the boundary. So it certainly is already having an impact.
When you plan out 5 years, 10 years, Jeremiah, and I'm sure for a company the size of Prologis, you're thinking about this a lot. And New York is obviously one of many markets, but it's a big one for you. what would you like to see 5 or 10 years from now? What are the key things that Prologis needs to see change in terms of government support, behavior, real estate to make your vision a reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. So one is, um, we think that a Blue Highways network is part of a larger last touch network. That the way we do last touch or last mile logistics in this country is really sort of still being defined, right? And as technology changes, as consumption patterns change, I think people are, we're still evolving and growing in that respect, especially in New York, right? This is a market that was largely served from the New Jersey side of the river for years and years, and we've seen it move some of that over, back into the boroughs. At the same time, I think that things like a micro distribution network, which is smaller, warehouses more dispersed throughout the city, is going to be, and there were some good first steps towards that in the city of Yes. I think there's more to do, but moving on the right way there. I think support for Blue Highways from a real estate standpoint is, the number of sites that are suitable for, as we said, I think one of the key pieces is an ability to have a facility on the landing side, on the destination side, to do, one of the last movements, if it's from the trailer to the bike, done there. The number of sites in the city is actually quite small, right? I mean, we for a lot of great reasons have converted a large portion of our waterfront to really wonderful parks and things like that. But you know, we, a working waterfront, I think, is really valuable, and we need to sort of preserve the spaces that we have left to do that. And again, that can be, to our early conversation, in a mixed use environment, but we still need places to do that. So it's some of the piers on the west side, it's some of the piers in Brooklyn, things like that. So, uh, preservation and support when it comes to repurposing those piers, we think will be critical. I think some of the tax tools that you talked about will be important for building out some of the infrastructure, like the gantries and things, like as you get into, should a barge load off the side or off the front? Does it come in bow first? Things like that. It does require infrastructure around that. And I think that's another sort of natural place for the city to be able to support on. But I think those are kind of the big three.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I
To
should
make it
just
happen.
highlight, the role of DOT is absolutely critical here, and
Yeah.
Department of Transportation, and they've been great partners for us. We're primarily focused on, that landing area, that port facility, wherever it is, and then once that e-cargo trike has that last touch, getting the product to a building or a residence. That's the private sector. It's interesting you mentioned the micro hubs, and I know that's something that DOT has put a big focus on. I'm curious, just with Prologis' real estate footprint, are you looking to convert spaces in buildings you have already for this kind of use, or are you looking to acquire new buildings or parts of buildings for this use?
I mean, that particular micro distribution use, I think, would be either within new buildings or potentially things that were developed with a portion dedicated to that. So
Mhm.
it's not, it wouldn't, it's on a smaller scale than I think the portfolio as we have now. It's sort of the next step that is something that might replace, the thing we see all over the city, which is a box truck, which is doing the sort of final sort. The box trucks are sort of serving like micro warehouses as they are today, right? Doing that final sortation, in a parking spot or on a sidewalk somewhere, or and DOT is, I think, have a lot of interesting and good ideas about maybe moving some of that to dedicated areas. But we think that the micro distribution is actually another key piece of, that's where something could come off of the Blue Highways, move to that micro distribution facility, and then make the last, either through someone on foot and a walker or on an e-bike. That's kind of the next step forward.
How vertically integrated is Prologis thinking in terms of this new approach? I'm mostly thinking about, that last touch, an e-cargo bike or trike, and there's scores of companies that are emerging out of the blue now that want to get in this space. A lot are coming from Europe. Some are starting here locally. Are you looking to forge partnerships there? Are you looking to acquire companies, start your
It would be
own?
partnerships, much in the same way that we don't operate fleets of trucks or, anticipate owning barges or ferries, right? Our partners and our customers are these transportation companies often, and so we'd be looking to them. We're about sort of helping envision and define and build the facilities that they need, but ultimately they're going to be the operators of those.
Interesting.
I think one more, and then we'll close. But uh, one of the things I think we all learned through the pandemic is it was a sort of case study in the fragility of the supply chain. Be it weather or uh, global disruptions or gridlock. How do you think about the marine network from a resilience standpoint?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question, particularly as it relates to food. The disruption in, food coming into the city during periods of time in COVID, were significant. We were lucky in Storm Sandy that, it didn't hit at a different hour, impacting the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center. Like it could have been a severe crisis for the city. So bringing food goods directly east to the Hudson by water is absolutely critical from a resiliency point of view. God forbid something happens on the Verrazzano or the GW. Think about the disruption caused by the Baltimore Bridge crisis. We need to have a much more resilient city in terms of getting food in and out. Again, I would go back to a resilient city from a health point of view. It is just not healthy to have 40,000 trucks, coming over those bridges every day and getting stuck in traffic and really having negative air impacts. We are moving very fast to electrify facilities, that move goods in and out of them, like Hunts Point, where thousands of trucks idle on fossil fuel generators all day long. That's just not sustainable. So we're investing billions up there, on the public and the private side, to convert to the kind of electric infrastructure so that those trucks can plug in, while also creating a blue highway connection point so goods can move more by water. I think electrifying over time the vessels, and there's all kinds of sustainable fuels that are getting tested now, from methanol to ammonia. We need to continue to drive that kind of innovation to make sure the tugs of the future, the ferries of the future, are using as clean fuel as possible. I haven't mentioned yet in this conversation too, just the benefit of EDC taking the lead here, and the fact that we have, 25 different NYC ferry landings around the city that could also dovetail to move goods in and out. Again, this would have to be, in relatively small packages. But if we can figure out the sequencing, the timing, a few infrastructure tweaks, those facilities are ready to go, and aren't as big as the Skyport, Pier 92 or something near it on the west side would be, or the Brooklyn Marine Terminal.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we think the ultimate answer here is a yes and, right, which is yes, we have been focused on sort of the larger infrastructure pieces with moving the larger amounts of goods, but that not only doesn't mean that there aren't spaces for some of the bikes on ferries or some of these other approaches. We think actually they all will often have a niche for a particular type of good that needs to get somewhere in a particular time frame, and given the overall volume and growth, that there'll be a lot of different solutions, and it won't be pick one or pick another. It'll be we need all of them actually to make an impact. So
Absolutely.
thanks for mentioning that one. I guess it's time for our signature closing question, which is what's a statistic or figure that you came across recently that really surprised you or stood out?
Well, I've mentioned the 40,000 trucks already, so that stat is out there, but that is just a stunning stat that most New Yorkers don't know about and need to focus more on as we think about public policy to deal with it, like the blue highways. Look, the other stat I would say that's really important and that sticks out for me is the 520 miles of shoreline in New York City. I grew up in New York City. I love getting down to the water. I had no idea until I was in this job the magnitude of the waterfront assets. A very, very significant percentage, more than 50%. Of that is controlled by one city agency or another. EDC has a very big footprint, but parks, DOT, DCAS, other city agencies play a huge role. And so, we have made enormous progress, I think, in this administration at organizing across agency to form the kind of collaborations that we need to create access to the waterfront for the kind of blue highway uses that we want to see happening, while we also create access to the waterfront for recreation and for ferries and for other uses. So again, we hope as we hand the baton to the next administration, they will take this up. But one of the amazing things, I'll just finish with EDC, is that while a lot of people are focused on the next year in New York or the next 4 years in New York, EDC focuses on projects that are decades long, if not generational. So we've been around for 30 years. Think about the diversification of our economy during that period of time, adding to finance, industries like life sciences and climate, the green economy, and really driving the use of AI across all of those sectors. That's why our economy is so resilient to some of the shocks that it's receiving right now. Think about some of the mega projects that we have developed, from Cornell Tech to Hudson Yards, and the next generation of that is going to be BMT, or the work we're doing up in Hunts Point. Blue Highway is going to be one of those things that, again, is going to take 10, 20, 25 years to really build out. But we believe in it, and we're focused, and we think we've laid the groundwork for the next administration to really run with this idea.
Yeah, I can't tell you how exciting it is as someone from the private sector to have a partner and a leader on the public sector that's really sort of taken a baton, and something we see is like the way, something we're excited about and moving forward with, but to have, someone from the city, from EDC, running, both leading and also, running beside us it's really refreshing and gratifying to kind of have that, to be able to both be pulling in the same direction. So thank you for your leadership there. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Thanks.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Moving the World. Big thank you to Andrew Kimball for joining the conversation. To hear more stories about the ideas changing how goods move, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep on moving.